Good afternoon, Tech Nation. Welcome to another fantastic Webinar Wednesday. We have over 480 pre-registered attendees, and today's presentation is eligible for 0.1 CE credits from the ATI. To get us started, let's give away another one of our I Am Tech Nation t-shirts. You know, opening day is just around the corner. Baseball season is upon us, sports fans. Who can tell us last year's World Series champion? American League, there's a hint. Use your questions feature on the right-hand side of your dashboard if you know who won last year's World Series, and you're going to get a great-looking Tech Nation t-shirt. While you're answering, Tech Nation would like to thank our sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. Fluke Biomedical is the premier global provider of test and measurement equipment and services to the healthcare industry. Visit www.flukebiomedical.com to learn about their products, services, and training. Okay, looks like we got a winner here. Corey Robinson guessed right, the Kansas City Royals. Fantastic, Corey. Send us your t-shirt size and we'll make sure we get that out in the mail to you. Okay, as a reminder, we are going to be hosting a special FDA webinar discussing the current FDA docket regarding third-party providers. That's going to be tomorrow, Thursday, March 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, please visit onetechnation.com/webinars. We're also going to have a special FDA panel on this at the MD Expo in Dallas on April 21 through 23. To attend the MD Expo in Dallas at no charge, a VIP pass from Fluke Biomedical was provided in today's workbook. Let's get started, everyone. Our presenter is renowned veteran in the medical device industry, Jerry Zion. He has more than 35 years of experience working in many capacities for hospitals and various medical device manufacturers. Jerry has spent the last decade at Fluke Biomedical as marketing manager, product manager, and pioneering the global training program. Jerry, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Great. Thanks, John. We're going to talk today about why metrology matters in medical device quality assurance testing. And for many of you, this is just going to be an introduction to metrology for medical device quality assurance. For some others of you that have had a little bit deeper training, this will probably be a review, and I would prefer and appreciate your feedback on what we're presenting, because Fluke wants to continue to be a thought leader and the leader in quality assurance, and especially around matters in metrology. So thanks, and let's get started with our presentation. Metrology, what in the world is metrology anyway? Metrology is the science of measurement. It's a subfield of physics. Metrology is an infra technology, and it's underpinned by most other technologies. So there are several different aspects to metrology. There's scientific or fundamental metrology, applied, technical or industrial metrology, and then legal metrology, which is what most of us will be thinking about when we think about metrology. Galileo said, measure what's measurable and make measurable what is not so. So that's a great quote for us to think about, and certainly it's something we think about here at Fluke and Fluke Biomedical all the time. Let's take a little deeper look at the different aspects of metrology. So scientific or fundamental metrology concerns the establishment of quality systems, quality units of measure and unit systems, the development of new measurement methods, realization of measurement standards, and the transfer of traceability from those standards to users in society. That's all of us in the biomedical community. The BIPM maintains the database of metrological calibration and measurement capabilities, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. Among those units of measure that we really care a lot about are length, mass, and time, but we also care about pressure, volts, ohms, and amps, and some other measurements, and we'll talk about those in a minute as well. The second aspect of metrology is applied technical or industrial metrology. And this part of metrology concerns the application of measurement science to manufacturing and other processes and their use in society, ensuring the suitability of the measurement instruments, their calibration and quality control of their measurements, Although the emphasis is in this area of metrology tends to be on the measurements themselves, traceability of the calibration of the measurement devices is also necessary to ensure confidence in the measurements. Legal metrology, the third aspect of metrology that we want to just present to you and introduce you to, concerns the activities which result from statutory requirements and concern measurement, units of measurement, measuring instruments, and methods of measurement, and which are performed by competent bodies. So such statutory requirements might arise from, for example, the needs for protection of health, public safety, the environment, enabling taxation, protection of consumers, and fair trade. In fact, an organization called OIML, the International Organization of Legal Metrology, was set up specifically to assist in harmonizing these regulations across the various national boundaries to ensure that legal requirements do not inhibit trade across the world. In Europe, WELMEC was established to promote cooperation in the field of legal metrology. So this is one of the reasons why metrology across the world in countries that are adopting minimum performance and safety standards, among other things, also adopt and create their legal metrology based on the units of measure that are needed for those, and for all of the reasons that we've talked about. So legal metrology really is important to us, but it's also important that we make sure everyone understands what metrology is, why traceability matters, what the concept of uncertainties are around the measurements that we make using our test tools, not just Fluke Biomedical, but all of us in the biomedical community worldwide, the measurements we make, the test instruments we use, and how we know that a DC volt, for example, measured here in the US is the same as a DC volt measured in Thailand, the same as one measured in Europe and in the European continent, or anywhere else in the world, and why it really makes a difference. So how long has metrology been around? Well, it turns out it's been around pretty long. Let's just take as a really great example one of the oldest instances of metrology that we can find, and that is metrology of the pharaoh. And it turns out in ancient Egypt, the measurement unit was the cubit, and I'm sure many of you have heard of the cubit. But you may not know what the cubit, how long a cubit really is. A cubit is approximately the length of the pharaoh's arm. And so you could argue that that means it's a variable, and we agree with you. Nevertheless, that's what they set up. The cubit is the length of the pharaoh's arm. And working cubits were made out of wood from the master. The master was cast in granite. The working cubits had to be checked against the master periodically under penalty of death. Okay, so we don't have that penalty if we don't choose to go get our test instruments calibrated today to make sure that a DC volt that we measure with a digital multimeter or an electrical safety analyzer is the same as the primary digital DC volt. But we do have a responsibility in the community to make sure that we're playing according to the rules and the guidelines. And that's what we're really wanting to talk to you about a little bit today. So the reasons we listed before about why these measurements and the units of measure matter include fair trade, so that no matter where we're buying something, clothing for example, that we can count on the sizing of that clothing to be uniform across the world. Even if we're using different units of measure, we can figure out exactly what those should be. For safety, and that's where all of us in the biomedical engineering and healthcare technology management community engage, we depend on these measurements for medical electrical safety and minimum performance standards of all the medical devices, among many other things. Legal requirements, if there is legal metrology set up, the manufacturers and hospitals have a legal responsibility to keep records to show that the medical devices and the test instruments used on them are calibrated and accurate, and that the calibration is traceable back to the primary unit of measure. Interoperability becomes more and more important as we think about the electronic health record and portability of that record. So we've got all kinds of new laws like HIPAA, the Health Information Portability and Protection Act, as well as the Affordable Care Act, which is driving a lot of the interoperability issues that many of you are dealing with today. Traceability is really important, as we've already said, and then consistency and quality. How do we gauge quality in terms of our measurements that we're all making, and how those relate to anybody else, in particular when we've got problems, like when there's an incident that has to be dealt with, and if you are being deposed, for example, due to a medical legal issue that's come up. We really don't want that to happen, but it does happen no matter how good or poorly we take care of the medical devices. So let's go through a little bit of the glossary of terms, and I just want you to know that this glossary comes from the VIM, the Vocabulary of International Metrology. This is agreed to on a global scale, so it's important for all of us to get used to these terms and learn what they mean and use them correctly, and there's a couple of them that can be really confusing and very ambiguous if we don't say exactly what we mean. So let's just go through a few of these. Metrology, for example, the science of measurement and its application. It includes all theoretical and practical aspects of measurement, whatever the measurement uncertainty and field of operation may be. Measurement is the process of experientially obtaining one or more quality values that are intended, that are within the intended use of the measurement instrument and affect our calibration of our measuring system, the operating and are operating according to the specified measurements of the procedure, including the measurement conditions. Calibration. This is one of those terms that, if we're not careful, confuses everybody. Here's what the real meaning of this term calibration is when we look at metrology terminology, the official use of the word. It means the operation that, under specified conditions in a first step, establishes a relation between the quality values within the measurement uncertainties provided by measurement standards and corresponding indications with associated measurement uncertainties, and in a second step uses the information to establish a relation for obtaining a measurement result from an indication. So what we see displayed on our test instrument is an indication. The result that we get is based on our understanding the measurement uncertainties that are affected by what we see displayed on our instrument. So we should not confuse calibration, and I'll use the term, add the term here to this word, calibration verification, with calibration adjustment, which means the adjustment of a measuring system in order to bring it back within its specifications. So we'll talk more about calibration adjustment in a minute, but this is the calibration verification measurement. These are the measurements that we make and that we document as part of preventive maintenance or medical device quality assurance testing, which mean kind of the same thing, including everything that we measure in the workflow in the testing procedure, whether or not the instrument that we use is able to automatically or digitally send its measurement value anywhere else. So this could be a ruler, it could be a tape measure, it could be a stopwatch that doesn't have a data port. It could be everything that we think about and many things that we don't think about that are actually measurements that should be traceable. Calibration adjustment is the adjustment of a measuring system, and this means, the adjustment means a set of operations carried out on a measuring system. That's like our DMM or our electrical safety analyzer or our electrosurgery unit analyzer. A measuring system so that it provides prescribed indications corresponding to given values of a quantity that is to be measured. So when we make an adjustment, either on our test instrument, which would be something that Fluke would do for you when you send it back to us for Cal, or by you on a medical device in order to make sure it is operating within its specifications, and especially those that are tied back to the standards for minimum performance safety. That calibration adjustment that you're making on that medical device is a traceable, should be a traceable measurement. And your accuracy of your test instrument and your understanding of the uncertainties are important in making sure that the values the clinician, the doctor or the nurse will use from seeing on that medical device or a strip chart that will be produced from that device, and make clinical decisions about drug therapy, about nutritional therapy, about defibrillation as a therapy, or other kinds of chemotherapy matter. It all matters. And so that's why all of this is so, so important, and surprising it is that nobody seems to be teaching this anymore, so we're undertaking to help you with this. Traceability is a term that means the property of a measurement result, whereby the result can be related to the reference through a documented unbroken chain of calibrations, each calibrating to the measurement uncertainty. So that means if we measure a DC volt, it needs an unbroken chain of traceability as documented in the calibration certificates of every test instrument that was used as a transfer standard from the primary creation of the unit of measure. So in this case, the DC volt is a primary unit of measure, and it is created in a lab, and it is traceable through transfer standards right down to the DMM that we use, or the electrosurgery analyzer or electrical safety analyzer that we use as examples, and to the medical device itself where DC volts matter and where you're going to be making measurements for performance specifications. So traceability is important for you to understand and have enough information so that on audit you can show that you know and are in control of the calibration of your test tools and the medical devices that you're responsible for. Measurement error is the measurement quantity value minus a reference quantity value, okay? So if our reference quantity value is our specification range for accuracy of that measurement in a medical device, our plus minus either hard numbers or plus minus a percentage of the displayed or measured value, then I think we understand this. The error is how far off from the actual center point or the most desired measurement value itself is the measurement that we just made. So we're always comparing this back to specifications from the medical device manufacturer and from the standards for minimum performance and safety. Emphasis on minimum performance and safety because that's all that's asked of us. Nevertheless, excellence calls for us to have the best safety and performance that we can get out of the medical device. So this is measurement error, the depiction of measurement error. You can see the red bars are our boundaries, our plus minus, and our blue line, the little curve there, is the measurements that are made in the process of verifying performance in this particular case. Accuracy. Accuracy is the closeness of agreement between a measurement quantity value and the true quantity value of the measurand. That is, what is our expectation exactly, and how much difference is there between that and the measurement quantity that we just made, that we just see on our display. So there's a difference between accuracy and precision. For those of you who are archers or shooters, who like to go either hunting or who like to go target shoot with firearms, accuracy means we've got everything in the bullseye. Precision means we have a tight pattern, but it's not necessarily in the bullseye. You can have a tight pattern but not be in the bullseye at all for a lot of different reasons. What we want as biomedical engineers across the world is both accuracy and precision in the measurements that we're making. Resolution is a different question, and we can talk about resolution on a different day. Precision is the closeness of agreement between indications or measured quantity values that are obtained by replicate measurements, so repeated measurements, on the same or similar objects under specified conditions. So we're just making sure that we control the variables and that we're making the measurement the same way each time. And then we're trying to judge, are we just got a tight pattern here, or is it both precise and accurate, meaning everything's in the bullseye? Okay, those are the terms and the terminology. And those are available in a course that we have in the, or that we will have in the Advantage Training Center. And the topic of this workshop and webinar topic, so that you can understand that. So you can get those from us at any time, and you will be able to take that course and get a specific certificate of completion for it if you want. Let's talk a little bit about the international system of units that are where everything starts, where all of the primary units of measurement are taken care of. The International System of Units is translated from French, which is Système International des Unités, and it is SI. These are the SI units that you've learned a little bit about in high school and college, and it is a modern form of the metric system. And it's the world's most widely used system of measurement in both commerce and in science. The world, for the most part now, uses SI units as the common standardized set of measurement units. And to a large degree, those of us here in the biomedical engineering community are familiar with these because they are the units of measure that we use clinically. Who maintains this SI system? Well, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, BIPM, is an international standards organization established specifically to maintain the SI system under the terms of the meter convention that happens and that is reviewed all the time. The BIPM is who controls the SI system. All right, let's talk about a few of the units of measure, and you're going to begin to see here how this pulls into and ties to what you do every day. The SI and base units, there are 7 base units that we've identified here. There are actually a few more, but there's not more than 9. The first base unit is the quantity about length, and the SI unit for length is the meter. The SI unit for mass is the kilogram. Now, not weight, but mass, and there's a difference. The time SI unit is seconds, and the electrical current SI unit is the ampere, which we would all guess. The thermodynamic temperature SI unit is degrees Kelvin, and I know we use degrees centigrade in medicine and in the hospital and healthcare industry, and that's okay. This is about the thermodynamic temperature standard, and Kelvin is always done at 0 degrees. The amount of substance, or at absolute zero I should say, the amount of a substance, SI unit, is the mole, and those of you who have taken chemistry know about that. Luminous intensity, this SI unit, is the candela. There are some derived units of measurement under SI, and those include area. So area is in square meters. Volume, that is a volume of some liquid or powder or something, is the cubic meter. Velocity is meters per second. The measurement of force is, the SI unit is newtons. The measurement for pressure, the SI measurement, is the pascal, kilopascals, or so forth. The electrical resistance is the ohm, a very familiar value and unit of measure for us. Capacitance is the farad, again, very familiar to those of us trained in electronics. EMF, electromotive force, is the volt, and of course a very familiar unit of measure for us. And then just standard temperature, not thermodynamic temperature, but regular temperature like we use in medicine and healthcare is degrees C. NMI are the National Institutes of Metrology, and there are institutes of metrology for, or can be for each and every country. And BIPM says each nation has its own metrology infrastructure. In most cases, the BIPM interacts principally with one national metrology institute per nation, as nominated through that nation's Foreign Affairs Department. That NMI is responsible for coordinating with all other institutes to make up that nation's metrology system. So, for example, if you are in Colombia, South America, and you have a DMM, and you need to get it recalibrated, whether or not you send that unit back to Fluke Biomedical for that calibration event, that traceability is going to want to go through that that local, especially if you send it locally anywhere. Let's say we had a Fluke Biomedical Authorized Service Center there, which we do, and you send it to that service center. That service center's traceability is through that NMI. And on the other hand, when you just get a brand new DMM or electrical safety analyzer from Fluke Biomedical, for example, that traceability of that calibration is through Fluke Biomedical directly to SI, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how that works, or through an NMI here in the US, which you're familiar with, which is NIST. So it's NIST traceable. We have both, and I'll show you why we have both in just a minute. But that helps you understand the role and responsibility of the National Institutes of Metrology around the world. And in the emerging world where they're just adopting minimum performance and safety standards, we often find that the National Metrological Institute is also just beginning to be established, and they're working out the traceability and the metrology in their countries. So we sometimes get involved with that and provide advice to that process, but that process takes place all by itself, and then BIPM interacts with them from there. Here's some key NMIs. NIST, as we already have identified in the USA, the NRC in Canada, PTB in Germany, the LNE in France, NPL in UK, the NIM in China, NIMJ in Japan, and CNAM in Mexico. And those are certainly not an exhaustive list, but just a list that some of these you may be familiar with. Okay. So now we've talked about the terminology, including what in the world is metrology in the first place. We've talked a little bit about why the measurements are important and the units of measure. And we've talked about a concept called traceability. We've also talked about what is the organization or system through which all of this traceability will find a pathway, and how the unbroken chain of traceability will be defined and be understood based on that global system of NMIs, National Institutes of Metrology, overseen by the BIPM. Traceability is a step-by-step transfer process that takes place in the form of an unbroken chain of calibrations, that is the paper trail, extending all the way to the SI, the System International, that is the unit of measure and its original source. Each calibration must include stated uncertainty, and so you should be looking for those disclosure of those uncertainties of the test instruments that are used to calibrate your test instrument, and you should be prepared in your biomedical department to provide your uncertainties, because they add to the stack up of uncertainties all along the pathway of traceability. So uncertainties, that is, how sure are you that your measurement is within the specified tolerances for that unit of measure as defined by the System International and the BIPM through your National Institute of Metrology in your country. And that's how traceability is gauged. And the unbroken chain means that we can trace every step of the way from our medical device through our test instrument all the way back to SI on the unit of measure that we're talking about. And you know, DMMs and electrical safety analyzers and electrosurgery unit analyzers and the like all measure more than one unit of measure. They measure volts, they measure ohms, they measure amperes. They may make some other measurements that are also traceable. So it's important for you to understand what those measurements are and how that unbroken chain and the traceability is supposed to happen. So when you look at Fluke or Fluke Biomedical, we are not always traceable. We're not traceable to NIST at all. We are traceable to the SI. We are traceable to the SI sometimes through NIST, for example, but we may be traceable through other NMIs as well in order to get back to SI. And that's how we define our traceability, and you can ask, and we should be able to tell you what our traceability is, just as you should be able to, when asked, tell what the traceability chain is for your test instrument. So let's look at an example, just a concrete example here. Right here in Everett, Washington, in the United States, downstairs at Fluke Park here in Everett, we create the primary DC volt. We do that with a Josephson's array. That Josephson's array is audited by SI, by BIPM, to make sure that we're doing it right and doing it well. And that uncertainty of that creation of the primary volt is 0.02 microvolts per volt. There's an uncertainty there. We disclose what it is. We know how certain or uncertain we are of the primary volt unit of measure that we're creating. From that primary volt, we transfer that to what we call transfer standards. So these would be a set of transfer standards that we use in each of the production cells in Fluke and Fluke Biomedical and other divisions of Fluke to create the test instrument that you will use from us. When we use that transfer standard, it adds to the uncertainty stack up. The uncertainty of that transfer standard, it brings us from 0.02 microvolts per volt to 0.1 microvolts per volt. You see how that's increasing the uncertainty? And from that transfer standard to the test instruments that might be used in a calibration laboratory, there's an additional uncertainty that brings us to 0.5 microvolts per volt for a DC volt measurement. And one final step, whether it's to your DMM or to the electrical safety analyzer that you get from Fluke Biomedical, that uncertainty has now become 8 microvolts per volt. That is our uncertainty. But you see, it is way, way, way certain. It's a very, very accurate measurement compared to what you're going to expect your measurements to be. So we see a 0.1% uncertainty of the measurements that we're making with the electrical safety analyzer that we put into your hands. Now, when you make measurements, there are additional variables that you need to take control of or figure out and account for in your uncertainty of the measurements you are making. So our uncertainty is 0.1%. However, yours might be a little bit higher, but they should still be very accurate. And there's a whole course about how to do these calculations that we're not even going to touch on today. That is what we hope to build out into a whole course around introduction to metrology for medical device QA. And then further, if you want more than that, a deeper dive than that, we'll be happy to refer you to our Fluke Calibration Division's courses, multiple day courses on each of several specific units of measure and the metrology around them. Here's a tidbit. Did you know that much of America gets its measurement traceability through Fluke? Not to Fluke, but through Fluke. And you might notice there Keithley, which is a legacy company that's made test tools for a long, long time. The Army, Navy, and Air Force get theirs. Tektronix, another division of Fluke, gets theirs. Transcat, where my younger brother works, and other companies that you'll see in there, including Lockheed Martin and some others. So let's talk a little bit about metrology for medical devices and get down to some more specifics here. So it brings it right down to where the rubber meets the road for you. For the medical device manufacturer, metrology and excellent metrology supports their R&D departments, their new production, product introduction process and operations on the production floor, their overall quality assessment, their service department for when their service engineers come in to do a calibration on the medical device in your facility, or when you have to send it back to them. To their sales, it matters a little bit, and to their marketing a little bit. It's important to you in terms of when you are selecting a new or a different medical device from a different company than the one you've had. How do you know that that company is providing you with a quality product? Well, one of the ways is through its traceability and through this whole concept of metrology. And that's one really good way to understand the quality of that company. And you do that, you'll use that with Fluke and Fluke Biomedical, and you'll use it with other companies as well. Philips, GE, we can make all of the big names and some smaller names too. For hospitals, that's you and me. The metrology supports our regulatory requirements under the FDA, the choice of medical technology that you're going to purchase, new product introduction acceptance testing. So you should always do acceptance testing of the medical devices that you're going to be purchasing. Medical device periodic quality assurance testing, that's what you do in preventive maintenance all the time. Calibration adjustment of the medical devices and the service and repair of those medical devices and the test instruments that you use. So it affects all of those areas. Let's take a look at a what-if scenario. We get from OEM to hospital to third-party calibration service, each of the instruments and fixtures used to calibrate and adjust the output of, for example, an infusion pump has been adjusted to a different standard. That's our scenario. So in other words, there's been a different transfer standard that's been used. And so our concern is, how accurate are we really? The infusion pump delivers medication, including opioids, to a patient. How shall measurements be compared for flow rate, volume delivered, and back pressure? What defines accuracy in this scenario? How accurate is accurate? What does that mean exactly? How has the risk of overdose or infiltration injury to the patient been managed? And all of the answers to those questions should come from the workflow that we use, the procedure that we use to verify the performance to minimum specifications to the manufacturer's specifications for the medical device, in this case an infusion pump, and should all be driven on our understanding of it. The accuracy that's required should be coming from those sources. The test instruments that we use and their traceability and the uncertainties that are delivered to us, we need to add our own uncertainty of measurement when we make the measurements on this particular medical device, this infusion pump. So I've put down accuracies that we publish about our IDA-1S. This is our little portable battery-operated one-channel infusion device analyzer. So the flow rate accuracy that we specify is 1% of reading plus or minus one least significant digit for flows up to 16 milliliters per hour and to 200 milliliters per hour for volumes over 20 milliliters. The volume accuracy is 1% of the reading plus or minus one least significant digit for flow rates of 16 to 200 milliliters per hour as long as the volume's over 20 milliliters. The pressure accuracy of full scale is full scale plus or minus one least significant digit is how we assess the accuracy for our measurements on our test instrument as we deliver it to you. But these all have to be taken take into account those uncertainties or variables that you need to control when you're making your own measurements on the infusion device itself. So the what if is, what if we were inaccurate enough that the medical device was, and its uncertainty put it just on the upper edge of the high side of its volume delivery specification. And our test instrument that we used was also on its upper limit of that same unit of measure for volume. Now it is possible that if we don't control the variables very, very, very closely, that we could have an inaccurate medical device that is able to deliver too much of the infusate, the medication that we're trying to deliver to the patient. If that happens, then we have a problem because that's discoverable medical legally. It's also outside the specified range for minimum performance and safety. So we have a real problem that we need to manage. I'm not saying that's going to actually happen. I'm saying it can happen. And that's why metrology matters here. It matters for defibrillator delivery, for how many joules of defib energy will be delivered and how much current it will produce in the heart tissue. It's important for pressure and volume delivered to a patient's lung to make sure, and the rate at which it's delivered, to make sure we don't do tissue injury in the lung or in the airways. It's important for a lot of different reasons for a lot of different medical devices, and that's the point I'm trying to get across today. So why does metrology matter? It matters because our job as biomedical engineers and health technology management professionals, HTM professionals, is to minimize the risk to the patient, to reduce the risk to the patient and maximize the availability or uptime of the medical device. That's our primary job. Everything else is secondary to that primary job. And if we're going to do that, we need to understand why metrology matters here. And we need to make sure that we're getting our test instruments returned on the recommended periodicity, the 1-year interval, and making sure that those calibrations happen. So we're sure our uncertainty is not variable based on our decision about whether to return this test instrument this year or wait another year before we even send it back. It also affects your economics because your cost may be different if you missed out on updates that are going to happen when you send it back to the original manufacturer. That's the case for us, for our business, but the risk to the patient overarches all of that, guys and gals. This is really, really important. It's at the heart of what we do every day. And I'm just going to leave you with one question. How do you want the medical device to perform if you or somebody you love is the next patient to whom that medical device will be connected and used? Your measurements and the accuracy of them, the traceability and your understanding of uncertainties matters every time you make a measurement. Whether you're the boss or whether you're the worker bee, it doesn't matter, except you should be making sure that you understand what you have in your hand and the measurement that you're making. If you do that, whenever you do that, every time you do that, you're making a huge difference in improving safety for that next patient, especially if it's going to be you or somebody you care about. And that's what I have to deliver to you today. I hope this is helpful to you. We really do. We understand that we haven't found anybody that's actually teaching this aside from those from the military and the tri-services. Those of you that are coming out of that probably have had more of this than anybody else. But we figure it's time that we start talking about it. And after 14 years here at Fluke Biomedical, I'm actually very happy to try and help put this in context for you and to try and help you understand something that we would tend to otherwise maybe avoid because it sounds really hard to understand. So help me help you. Please give us good feedback about this. It's important for us to improve and make sure that we're giving you the training that really does give you the advantage in your career. Thanks an awful lot.
Thank you, Jerry. We do have some questions. First off, what is the difference between accuracy and precision as attributes of a measurement made during medical device quality assurance testing?
So we talked about this, and the difference is we can have, as far as precision goes, we could have a tight pattern of measurements, maybe not all on the same exact measurement spot, but close to it, but not on the bullseye, which indicates accuracy. So we could be off the bullseye, but in a real tight pattern or area grouping of measurements. Where we really want to be is accurate and precise, which puts us inside the bullseye and puts all of the measurements of our grouping inside the bullseye. That's where we really want to be, and that's really the difference to try and make it easy to understand.
Good, thank you. Another question, I know we talked about this some, but could you please describe traceability?
Sure. Traceability is that unbroken chain of calibration measurements on specific units of measure that are traceable back to, that are important as SI units of measure. The traceability path is each transfer standard that gets used, including our test instrument in this case, if we're thinking from the point of view of the medical device. So with the medical device and our traceability of our test instrument that we use to calibrate it is important here. It's important for us to understand how many steps and where they are and how it's an unbroken chain between our test instrument in our hand, its calibration, and the uncertainties that are reported in around that, all the way back to the original primary unit of measure at SI. All the way. That is the unbroken chain, and that's what we mean by traceability.
Perfect, thank you. Another question we have is,
Why does there need to be worldwide agreement about what exactly is a particular measurement unit? For example, DC volts.
Okay, so if DC volts are different in different parts of the world, then I cannot count on any DC volt measurement as far as accuracy goes. Every single measurement then becomes questionable. And if I'm being given a guarantee that a particular test instrument or device makes a DC volt measurement that is absolutely the DC volt and I can count on it, I have to call that to question if DC volts are, if the standards that are used are different, if there is no agreement about what in fact is exactly a one DC volt. So it's important in terms of the entire trust relationship across the world among ourselves as biomedical engineers in our own community, among metrologists and in the metrology community, in trade relations from one country to another, and it escalates from there. So it is unbelievably important in order for us to trust each other across the world and for us to be able to do commerce, for us to be able to count on quality of medical care. So if I want to go get a cheaper heart transplant and I want to go to a destination medicine place, like I could go to Phuket, Thailand, I could go to places in ASEAN, in the whole ASEAN chain there, I could go to some places on different continents of the world and find hospitals that are claiming that they are just as good with just as good procedures and just as accurate and great a morbidity mortality rate. It all goes back to the measurements that we make and the accuracy that we are able to ensure in the medical devices themselves that are going to be used in that providing of health care or sick care to those patients. They're getting it for cheaper, but is it the same quality for cheaper? That's the question. Same thing for if you're buying a new test instrument that's coming from someplace you have never heard of before. How do you trust that? Well, the only way you can do it is if there's this agreement around the units of measure and the system of measurements that we are all using all day, every day. It really matters.
Perfect. And then another question we have is, how might patient risk be affected if a hospital biomedical engineering department does not have its test instruments calibrated at the interval recommended by its manufacturer?
If this is the case, if the test instruments that are used by a particular biomed department are not calibrated on their recommended interval by their manufacturer, and there are measurements that are made with that device, as there will be, and documentation of preventive maintenance and compliance with the specifications, at least to the manufacturer of that medical device level, then there is no guarantee for the patient that or the doctor or the nurse that medical device is performing correctly. It is possible that if under just the right circumstances, both the medical device and the test instrument are off in the same direction in a way that would cause too much or too little of a therapy to be provided to the patient, and the patient is injured or dies as a result, that is discoverable, and that is going to cost the hospital a lot of money, and it's going to hurt somebody for the rest of their life. And I just think that does not have to happen. All we need to do is understand why we need to do certain things, make sure we budget for it as a cost of doing business, and let's make sure we get it done and done well and done right. Now, we can talk about competitiveness. That's not what I'm here to discuss today. I'm simply saying make sure you get it calibrated and make sure you understand what that calibration really is. It's not just a verification. They have brought it back into the specified tolerances if it needed adjustment. It's critical, more critical than a lot of us are treating it these days.
All right, we have another submitted question. In some cases, the accuracy of the instruments is too low. For example, in SpO2, we have clinical tolerance of 1 or 2%, and the accuracy is 3%. What kind of solutions can we try?
Wow, that's a really loaded question, and here's why. There is no SI unit of measure for oximetry. It has no SI unit of measure that we can use to ensure the accuracy of the measurement. It is all determined based on clinical studies that are carried out as a requirement to get clearance to market from the FDA, to market in the United States by the FDA, carried out by the manufacturer of that medical device. So the accuracy, there's really not too much in terms of adjustment that we can actually do to an oximeter that really produce a traceable measurement for us. They are all assessed in terms of our preventive maintenance by functional testing, which means that we're going to use something close but not able to be really determined as a standard or as a metrology measurement for making sure that that is an accurate device. So that's a problem number one. But let me answer the question a little bit differently. Let's say the same question, but let's talk about NIBP. NIBP, its traceable measurement is in millimeters of mercury or kilopascals. Kilopascals is the specific SI unit of measure, but a lot of times we're measuring in millimeters of mercury. It's okay. It's a mathematical calculation to correct it to the SI unit. Not a problem. But it's important that we understand that the OIML, the International Organization of Legal Metrology, has weighed in on this particular parameter and said accuracy of an NIBP device is done by static pressure level comparisons and not by dynamic simulation or by clinical assessment. It's done by static pressure comparisons. So we need to be sure our testing is using the right test methodology, first of all. That controls the variable. Second of all, we need to make sure that we have no leaks in the system that would cause other variation in our measurement or inaccuracy in our measurement. That's controlling another variable and making sure we understand our uncertainty of the measurement. The pressure comparison will give us the accuracy that we need, because the accuracy of our test instrument and measuring system all in is more than 4 times more accurate than the clinical the specification of the clinical device, the NIBP unit itself. So our test instrument and our testing system and our uncertainties should still create an accuracy percentage much higher than the device that we're going to make the measurement upon, so that we minimize the influence of inaccuracy in our test instrument and its measurement on the actual medical device itself. Then we can check repeatability by using dynamic simulations or clinical measurements. And that all works. So that's maybe a better way. So the medical device manufacturer may say plus minus 3% of the set value is the accuracy they're looking for. The testing system you're going to use is going to be certainly 1% accurate or even a little better. That probably should include most of the uncertainties, but may not. So you have to figure out your own uncertainties around that. But that's how you would look at that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And we have a question from Argentina. Says they do not have a laboratory to calibrate testing equipment. Is there any project to install a calibration center?
Well, that's a huge question because it involves more than just Fluke Biomedical. If we limit it to Fluke and Fluke Biomedical, I don't know the answer. It's certainly one that I will be asking because I will be going to Argentina in June, I think, is when I'm going. So I will be down there, and I will have a lot of questions and have a look at what's happening in terms of National Institute of Metrology and standards and all of that, first of all, and second of all, what our plan is for the customers that are in that part of South America. The closest for some of our devices, the Fluke Biomedical devices now, the closest calibration facility would be in Colombia, South America. And we have a channel partner that is a Fluke Biomedical Authorized Service Center there and is recognized now, I believe, by Colombia NMI, and the traceability is appropriate. So, but it's a great question. In other cases, if you're concerned about how close or how far away your calibration center is, you can always ask and be happy to tell you. In some cases, it does have to come all the way back to the U.S. Very costly, very time-consuming. We understand that, so we are working on trying to move calibration centers closer, but we can't necessarily put one in every single country. It's really expensive. There's a whole lot of other things that go into it I can talk to you about at a different day. But the answer is that we're going to be looking at it. We're going to be seeing what we can do. The closest one is in Colombia.
Thanks, Jerry. Another question, I think I'm reading this right. Do you plan to develop a training course to calculate uncertainty?
Oh, it will certainly be part of the introduction to metrology for medical device QA. Probably we will use a simplified calculation so it's easy for everybody to understand, because there's a lot of detail. We could go dive way down in the weeds on that one. But we'll be working closely with the Fluke Calibration Division and Mr. Jeff Gust, who is the Fluke Chief Metrologist and well-published. He travels probably more than I do around the world working with NMIs and the SI system and providing discussions to the community of metrologists. So yes, the intent is that we will include some calculations of uncertainties.
Thank you, Jerry. And then how and where can someone find the uncertainty values of Fluke equipment?
For now, well, for Fluke equipment, in a lot of cases that's already disclosed in the calibration certificate, especially those that are requested for NIST or some other NMI traceability. For Fluke Biomedical, we are still working every single day here. We are working to improve the calibration certificate, and that's where you should expect to find the uncertainties and the test instrument that was used. The traceability path you probably need to ask about, and we could probably provide that information, but it's not on a form or a document or anything that's easy to necessarily just download or for us to provide you. We actually will have to go and answer it one by one. But the uncertainties need to be added to the calibration certificates for each of the test instruments that you'll send back to us, and for each one that we produce in the production cells. And Jeff Gust and I are talking a lot about that. He's working with our division in particular to make sure that we include those, and we're all working to a standard, an international standard called 17025, which talks and gives us the understanding of what does quality mean for a calibration laboratory. That's part of what that defines. So we're working hard on that. You're not going to find it right now. If you go and look up and pull out your latest calibration certificate, you will not see the uncertainties on it. I think if you need to know it, please just ask, and we'll find a way to provide it for you.
Thank you, Jerry. Our next question is, what is the difference between calibration and quality control?
So calibration Okay, so here we go. Which part of calibration are we talking about? Calibration verification, or are we talking about calibration adjustment? Quality control can't answer the question specifically without knowing which one we're talking about. Let me say what I think what the question is. Quality control means the process that we use to make sure we're keeping track of when test instruments or any device that needs to be calibrated, when it's due, and how we get it in and out, and making sure that we always are taking care of that. Quality control also means in the process of making an adjustment, should that device be found to be out of tolerance or on the edge of tolerance. That quality control includes our whole list of uncertainties, our stack up of uncertainties, making sure we're taking control over the variables to keep that uncertainty low, and our certainty of measurement therefore high, and the whole process of how exactly are we making the measurement and controlling any variables that occur there. And I would say that probably is part of the quality control. It's also how are we documenting what we just did? Is it an automatic documentation based on an automated system, or is a testing or measurement system, or is it a human being and pen and paper, or a human being and keyboard entry, where we could have typographical errors, where we could have dyslexia issues, and so forth, that still go into our variable set that need to be controlled and accounted for. So quality control is about a process and controlling a process. Calibration is about our understanding of the measurements that we're making and whether they are within the required specifications or they're not.
All right. And then we have a question here. Are sea level and barometric pressure important factors to consider in an environment to measure?
They could be. It depends. Jerry's favorite answer, it depends. It depends on the measurement that we're making and how it will be, how the measured value will be used in the device that we're the device under test. If we think about, for example, the pressure measurements that are done on a ventilator, for example, and we know that that ventilator is going to be used not only at sea level, but on a land basis above sea level, let's say maybe not on the top of Mount Everest, but certainly, let's say Colorado, Denver, Colorado, which we know is the mile-high city. So the difference in pressure between sea level and Colorado, Denver, Colorado, needs to be taken into account one way or another. In a really high quality and therefore a little bit more expensive test instrument, that might be taken in, or medical device, that might be taken into account by a built-in barometer in the device, so the device itself understands where it is relative to sea level and already compensates for that in terms of the displayed measurement. Otherwise, it's a mathematical thing that needs to be done after we make the measurement upon the measurement value that we just got to make sure that we've taken care of that difference. It's not huge, that difference, it's small, but it could matter, and that's why I say it depends. I hope that answers the question.
All right. And then what dictates the types of tests performed in a calibration and their inclusion in a calibration report/certificate?
So that goes back to the manufacturer's specification and the test procedure specified by the manufacturer in their service manual for how that calibration verification and further the calibration adjustment shall be done.
Okay, another question we have. Where should we place the units of medical devices, for example, volume rate for an infusion pump, according to base units? Is there a link between those units?
Sure. If you can still see my presentation, I'm just going to roll back. Oh, you paused. It's paused. Okay. So you won't be able to see it, but I'm going to roll back to roll back to the units. So volume is in cubic meters. That's the SI measurement for volume. Volume that we're talking about in the infusion device is in liters, milliliters, for example, not cubic meters. So there's a little bit of a difference there that can be corrected mathematically, but we would go back to the manufacturer specification and the minimum performance and safety standard internationally, at least for infusion devices, which all talks about milliliters and liters and really doesn't talk about cubic meters. But that's one example. So, and flow rate, so if we talk about, flow is not listed here in our set, but flow would be in milliliters per minute, which is kind of a form of velocity, and it's kind of another kind of derived unit. So there's more than the list that we just provided, but those are still back to the standard measurements that we would be making from a metrology point of view, and they come from the manufacturer's specification for the medical device or test instrument and its design in intended use. And those come from, in terms of medical devices, from the minimum performance and safety standards from the IEC. At minimum, even if our country has not adopted minimum performance and safety standards, we're never wrong to go back to the IEC standards and use them while our country is deciding what their standards are going to be.
All right. And then the next question is, how are uncertainties combined when using different instruments in chain? For example, pressure sensor and oscilloscope measuring its output voltage.
So each of them has its own uncertainty, and they both are included in the calculation of the uncertainty in terms of the stack up of uncertainties. And the more details about that will be disclosed in the full course or about Introduction to Metrology for Medical Device QA, as we discussed earlier and promised. A simple calculation will be provided there for how you get to the total uncertainty of the measuring system that's being used. In the meantime, you're free to take a look on an internet search, which I have found to be you get pretty good accurate information about this, and look at uncertainties and calculations of uncertainties, and you will find there really what we're going to provide as well. You can go and find it today if you really need to know it. I'm not going to go into it right now, right here, because we didn't have a slide on it that we really could help everybody understand what the calculation is really all about. We will add that as we build out the course, I promise you.
All right, we have one last question for you. All the other questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll be able to share those with Jerry, and he'll make that information available via email. The question we have here is, you should know this one for sure, Jerry. How does a calibration lab become Fluke authorized service center for calibration of Fluke Biomedical devices? How is quality maintained?
So the part of Fluke and that Fluke Biomedical participates in and Tektronix participates in is called our SSO, our Shared Services Organization. The SSO is responsible for all of our after-sales calibrations and that need to happen in the whole context of service and repair. So calibration and repair. no matter whether it's a Fluke test instrument, a Fluke Biomedical test instrument, a Fluke industrial device like a DMM, or any of the Fluke-owned tools. In fact, they do more than that. They'll do other manufacturers' stuff as well. We have great agreements with other companies that make test tools, whether we make the same ones or not, or similar ones or not, to be able to do those calibrations for you. The SSO has its own requirements for what authorization is. They also are the ones that decide where our authorized service centers are going to be placed, as well as where our Fluke-owned service centers are going to be placed. So they have a dual responsibility there. And this is a global group, so it works all around the world for us. However we feel about how they're doing right now, they do work really, really hard on this, and their standards and the quality control and the quality assurance are all part of what Jeff Gust is working closely with them and with us in terms of both production and service and repair for all of the Fluke and Fluke Biomedical test tools that are out there. So we are all audited and work in accordance with the BIPM and SI units for our primary creation of those units, and for our processes 17025 is the international standard by which all of us get judged, and we judge ourselves. So we're really all working always towards that standard. And that's an international standard, so it means everybody is really in the international community that cares about this is really working very hard to try and make sure that you can feel confident in any company that is able to say we are 17025 certified, that you're going to get quality from that company. That includes Fluke.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you again to today's sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. One lucky attendee will win lunch for their whole department. Details are included in the post-webinar survey. The survey will appear on your screen shortly. You must complete the survey to obtain your certificate of attendance. If you do not see the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Thank you and have a great afternoon.